Okay, for number six, I can tell you a couple things with great certainty. One thing I can tell you is the College Board asks about this every year because ecosystems are complicated and nature is complicated. We find that some rhythms in nature are cyclical and they keep going and they're self perpetuating. And we also find in nature that there are some rhythms which are self regulating. Like once they get going, they control themselves and stop. Um, the College Board asks about this every single year. It's always on the AP test. It's a reliable, dependable, always going to be there sort of question. Another thing I can tell you is the students always mess something up. There's one persistent misunderstanding. One of my jobs as a teacher is to keep you from making the mistakes that all the kids make nationwide. And the College Board does a lot of outreach to teachers like me. I do a lot of trainings with the College Board so I can be a better teacher for you. And one of the things that they train us on is make sure your kids don't do what's so common, the common misunderstandings. And the most important thing that you should know is not positive or negative feedback is these aren't like compliments and insults. It's not like a positive outcome or a negative outcome in terms of what's good or bad or what's nice or mean or what you like or you don't like. Oh, you look really good in those shorts. I don't really like your bangs. Those are positive, negative feedback about your looks, right? And this is lingo that we use all the time. So I think it's normal and understandable that when this catches you off guard and you're stressed out and you're trying to bang through the questions, you're going to make that mistake. I have to warn you that the College Board will trick you with this. They'll find a positive feedback about something we don't like. So where climate change causes more climate change, or where extinctions lead to more extinctions, these are negative value things, right? They're things we don't like. I'm not saying that that's good, but it's still positive feedback because the outcome makes more of it. Look what I wrote on the board. These are cycles. And the question is, what comes out? Does it make more input? That's a positive feedback. So that the outcome makes more of that thing happen, positive feedback. Or does the outcome prevent more inputs? I'll give you some examples now. There's one classic. This is the big one. Like in all environmental science, this is the really scary one. The runaway train is that global warming will make the permafrost and ice caps melt, and trapped in all that frozen dirt and ice are a bunch of greenhouse gases, right? Which would cause more global warming, which would melt more permafrost and ice caps, which would release more greenhouse gases. This is the big one. This is like the nuclear option, so to speak. When we talk about climate models, I'll give you a hint now before we get to that unit later. The elephant in the room, the $10 million disaster, the one that we're really worried about, is the idea that global warming will end up causing more global warming that makes more global warming that makes global warming worse. And you can imagine this is destabilizing, right? Like once you get into this cycle, things are going to take off. You could imagine perhaps in my marriage. I eat too many gummy bears because they make me feel good sometimes. And my wife says, you look kind of chunky, Jose. So I get depressed and think, oh, my wife doesn't love me and she's not going to snuggle with me anymore. And so I get sad. But I know how to make myself feel better. I'll just eat more gummy bears. And perhaps you can imagine this is the runaway train of my weight gain. Maybe you can identify with this, or maybe you know somebody with a similar struggle. Negative feedback is the opposite, where the output of the cycle is not going to make more input. It's going to prevent the inputs. So imagine a world where I eat too many gummy bears because they make me feel good. And my wife thinks to herself, dang, this guy should really work off some calories. And she proposes maybe we take a walk or something to work off some calories. So I get distracted and I focus more on her, and she talks to me about my kid's upcoming birthday, and I get excited and I just sort of forget to eat those gummy bears. And you can imagine that output prevents her from thinking that I need to work off the calories, right? I got skinnier. I didn't eat more gummy bears. In other words, this is a stabilizing or a self-regulating cycle. You should make sure you have all this lingo. Positive feedback, self-perpetuating, destabilizing. Negative feedback is regulatory, self-control, stabilizing force. If you want a climate example, there are negative feedbacks in climate systems. Before I say anything else, you should know that the positive feedbacks of climate are stronger than the negative ones. So it's not like this means we'll never have climate change, but you can imagine more CO2 makes a hotter planet, and in a hotter planet, plants grow more, so they soak up some of that CO2. That's a negative feedback, right? The input was the CO2, but the output is less of that input. That's stabilizing. That's regulatory. Like I was saying, this is not as strong as positive feedbacks in climate in particular, but here's a climate example of negative feedback. Now remember, this is not positive, negative in terms of good, bad. The idea that climate change regulates itself, that's good stuff, but that's negative feedback because it's not positive, negative like good, bad. It's positive, negative like self-regulating or destabilizing. Make sure that you ask me questions if some of this doesn't make sense. Sometimes I do this stuff at 11:50 at night. Good God.